amazing Saturday together again through this electronic way to present ourselves, which is still okay. At least we give thanks and thank God for this opportunity to have technology helping us here at the SSB. Tonight, having Kirsten here with us talking about Jesus and Torments, a continuation of the amazing study of the book Jesus in Our Days by the medium Divaldo Franco and Joanna de Angelis, the mentor. So before we pass the word to Kirsten, we dive into the studies and the teachings of tonight. Let us read a passage of the book Happy Life, also by Joanna de Angelis, and then we'll pray together and then we'll dive into the teachings of tonight. So here it is, the old version. It is page 83. Nobody reaps in another's field when it comes to moral values. Everyone is in his own air. Immortal spirit that he is, he evolves from stage to stage. Like a student in the school of love, there he reaps the lesson when he errs and gets promoted when he does it right. In this way, in one existence, he picks up where he left off in the previous one, corrects what was wrong, or begins a new experience. Pain, however, may force him to carry out what he does not accomplish out of love. Once more, page 83, the old version of the Happy Life book. It is actually chapter 70, if I'm not mistaken, LXX. On this note, let us pray together. Reminding everyone that this is a very important moment, that we're bringing the teachings that we have, the moments that we have at the SSB to our home. So if you can please focus and try to put aside any distraction, anything that will take you away from this message, let us do so. And you may close your eyes. You may find a comfortable position. Let us find a comfortable position, rather. And thank our dear Creator for this amazing opportunity that we have to be together once more, leading the way with teachings that will not only amaze us, but it will bring us comfort, encouragement to continue in our day-to-day lives. Let us pray for one another who are here, who will be following us through the web in the future. Also, our family members, our friends, everyone, to stay safe and to develop an immune system, not only for the physical body, but for the spiritual one. This way, allowing ourselves to receive, emanate, to transform ourselves in general. We are thankful, dear Lord, for this amazing moment to have one another and to share teachings so we can make this world a better one for ourselves and for the ones to come. We thank you, and so be it. So tonight, or this afternoon still, before we get into the evening, Kirsten, as we said, starting this beautiful month of May 2nd today, talking about Jesus and Torments, a chapter of the book Jesus in Our Days. With no further ado, I would like to pass the stage to Kirsten. We will have a moment at the end where we'll be able to share questions and moments and comments, and we'll be following you through your questions, not only through Facebook, but also through YouTube. Thank you. Go ahead, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Leo, and hello to everyone that's watching or listening to this. Many blessings to you. And just to add on to what Leo just mentioned, please feel free to make comments, whether you're watching us via Facebook or YouTube, in the comment section, and Leo and or I will try to address them towards the end as best we can. So, but feel free to comment as you wish, even during the talk. That's no problem whatsoever. So before I actually start this presentation today, I wanted to sort of make a little bit of a disclaimer in a way, because this particular topic, when we're discussing torments, or people that are tormented, people that are suffering. It's a very delicate subject. And I wanted to honor those who are suffering and offer up this next hour of vibrating love, of serenity, of peace, of hope to them, whether they're on the planet Earth or have already passed on. Because those are the most difficult moments in our evolution, is when we are going through moments or periods of time where we are going through anguish. It's extremely difficult for many reasons. And it's not by chance that Leo opened up to chapter 70, page 83 of Happy Life, where Joanna, once again, reminds us that we reap what we sow. And we believe that when that phrase is repeated, it's not meant to be derogatory in a sense. It's not meant to be off-putting. It's not meant to put anyone down or to point fingers and to say, well, it's your fault. You know, you're suffering because you did it to yourself. That's not the attitude that Christ would want us to have at all. That is an incorrect way of living our lives, of perceiving and of acting in our own lives. It's an incorrect way for us to behave, whether it's towards our own self, whether we are saying that to ourselves, or whether we are saying that to somebody else, or whether we are thinking that about somebody else. It's completely against what Spiritism is teaching us and what the teachings that Jesus left for us. It's completely contrary, although it happens more often than we'd like to say. So when we think about, or when we develop the ideas that Joanna shared with us in this chapter today, we kindly ask that you do an internal reflection on yourself and that you do not think about, John Doe or your neighbor or this person or that person. And yeah, that's why they're suffering, or that's why they're going through trials and tribulations. That's not the point. The point is always at the end, or in the beginning rather, the point of our lives is pretty much summed up, at least in part. One of the purposes of our lives is summed up in question 919 of the Spirit's book. What is the most effective means of improving ourselves and to resist evil? Know thyself. How can I get better and also resist my negative tendencies? Know thyself. Well, how do I do that? Well, the beauty of this particular book that we're going to be discussing today, this particular chapter, I should say, chapter 15, is yet again a great reminder for us to go inward, for us to self-reflect, to gauge where we're at. But let us understand what the word torment means to begin with, so we have a backbone, a starting place to understand. So torment means extreme pain or anguish of body or mind, agony. It's a source of vexation or pain. In other words, something nobody wants. It's an experience that nobody wishes on themselves, and highly likely, you probably don't wish on anybody else either. What causes one to be tormented? A lot of things. Could be personal issues, struggles. Could be the death of a loved one, or of a pet, or of loss of anything else that we are attached to. And last month, we discussed in chapter 14 about attachment. We talked about Jesus and possessions, and that idea of attachment, and how the very idea of us being attached to something already lends itself for us to suffer. Because once that thing is taken away, we suffer. This is so significant. It always seems significant, especially in the times that we're living right now, where we are forced to be isolated. For the most of us are forced to be isolated. Some still have to go out and work with the public and be on the front lines and be out there and fully exposed. But even so, the vast majority of people, our lives have been turned upside down by this new novel virus. So it begs for us to question, are we attached to our old way? Are we tormented by the new life that we have been forced into now? And why does that torment us so much? Why are we holding on to something when that mere idea of attachment doesn't serve us? It's a source of pain, of anguish, yet we hold on to it. Let's think about why. Joanna begins to, from her psychological perspective, begins to help us to understand the mind of the human being. She says, generally speaking, human beings have been considered to be a still incomplete mental and physical mass, heading for the grave where it decays. Religions say that the soul has a destiny purposefully fixed in the future, reposing in idleness or suffering everlasting punishment. For the former, the world is a place of immediate pleasures with the unavoidable presence of suffering, which is part of its imperfection. For the latter, it is a, quote, valley of tears, or a, quote, place of exile. This reminds us a lot as we were discussing the book Heaven and Hell, and this belief that many people hold that we are either destined for this place of heaven or this place of, as Joanna calls it, the valley of tears or place of exile. So we still have a very limited perspective of our own selves. Humanity, for the most part, people look at us as just a physical body. We're born, we live our life, we die, we go back to the ground. And you either go to heaven or you go to hell, quote unquote. He goes on to say, on the other hand, the simplistic information of nothingness after death, on the other hand, preset fatalism, violating the codes of wanting, struggling, and overcoming. So we have those that look at the physical body and say, we're born, we die, we go to heaven, we go to earth. We go to heaven, we go to hell. Then she reminds us, well, there are other ideas out there who people believe that once you die, there's nothing. You go nowhere. It's this void of nothingness. Or you have a preset destiny, a preset fatalism. And that's it for you. And she tells us either one of these currents of thought unavoidably leads to torment. When we allow ourselves to believe that we are devoid of choice, of capability, of personal growth, of something deeper, even if we are unaware, perhaps we're more attached to the materialistic side of things, it is a source of torment. For those who believe in nothingness, It's also a source of torment, especially for their loved ones who pass on. And they believe that that's it. They'll never see them again. They cease to exist. All that love you've worked on your whole life, the relationship, boom, is gone. That's a great source of torment. She goes on to say, here, pleasure until the senses grow numb. There, frustrating bitterness, the banishment of happiness, and evasion of reality dynamics. So we have extremes. Either we have this complete bliss of heaven one day we'll reach, or total darkness and, as she says, banishment of happiness. We'll be in the flames of hell, if you will. Based on these two aspects, there are those who live to enjoy and those who deny themselves any form of enjoyment. It's the extremes, one or the other. These things bring torment. They wreak havoc on our ability to be happy, to find happiness. In comes our Savior. And I do in quotation marks because in Western culture, Jesus as our Savior has a different meaning than from when Spiritism views Jesus as our Savior. Jesus is our master, model, and guide. He was a perfect spirit. He is a perfect spirit. So when he came into the picture, into our consciousness, into this collective consciousness, he changed the game. Now, there were others before him that were paving that way for him, who were getting ready, fertilizing the soil, if you will. But he came and really just changed everything, created a new paradigm. And Joanna brings that to us. And she says, Jesus was the prototype of happiness. Now, what is a prototype? If you have a prototype of a new device, it's kind of like, in other words, like a perfect example of what something should be or will be. So he was the perfect example, perfect model. And she begins describing him, his characteristics. He loved nature, he loved people, and he loved the simple endeavors with which he wove his wonderful parables. He loved. He was love. He embodied what love was and is. He neither condemned nor praised earthly conditions. So this brings us to the phrase from the Bible that says, be in the world, but not of the world, I believe the phrase is. But basically, it's meaning to say, much like Jesus modeled for us, we can be living in this world, but not have to be so intrinsically and integrally attached to everything. We often become quite attached and or we find the allure of whatever's popular, whatever's going on, whatever's the new fad. You know, in that same book we read today, Happy Life, she talks about these fads, these things in our culture that are popular for a time, but then pass. And if you look back, you know, from the 80s era, what was popular back then, hairstyles, clothes, music, etc., they pass. But what doesn't ever change is morality, goodness, the divine laws. They always remain the same, no matter what we're going through, no matter what we're enduring. Detachment. You see, because Jesus was able to live here, he loved nature, he loved animals, he loved his disciples, he loved people, he loved the land, he loved everything. But he was able to be here and love without the need to be attached to everything. So it's a way for us to also learn how to live that way, to free others and also free ourselves. She goes on to say, as master, he taught how one should utilize and respect them, using their means to generate happiness for all, thus honoring them. So he utilized the resources of the earth, unlike how we are doing now. We are abusing the earth and her beautiful resources. Just recently, we are watching Planet of the Humans. It's a documentary with executive producer Michael Moore. It's on YouTube. It's free. You just search for it. And it just dictates or just shows what's going on our planet right now and has been for decades. It's the complete opposite of how Jesus lived. Joanna tells us Jesus, he taught how one should utilize and respect, using means to generate happiness for all and honoring them. So he didn't take advantage. He didn't overly expose or exploit, rather. He did none of those things. He knew how to have balance and how to honor those things. The interesting thing that you'll find when you're studying Joanna and a lot of Spiritist books, that it doesn't tell you specifically, step by step, what we need to do. For instance, go and recycle. Go and do this. They give us suggestions. This is what will help us lead to mental balance, mental clarity, higher spiritual connections, how to live more Christ-like. But the point of these teachings, is not for us to be told as if we were sheep what to do, but for us to go inward, self-evaluate, know thyself, as St. Augustine explains in Question and Answer 919 of the Spirit's book, taking time every day to get to know yourself, to know where you're at. This is extremely vital. And we might think, well, Kirsten, you said that this talk was dedicated to those that are suffering and tormented. Absolutely. Then how is this valid for those that are suffering? Well, if the root cause of our suffering lies within us, who else can tell us what our root cause is, if not us ourselves? Is not that the purpose and the beauty, in a sense, of suffering? Is that we ourselves are the only ones who can go in deep inside of our soul to figure out, to work on ourselves, to work through any issues, to get to know who we really are, our potentials, and that life is not black and white. We're not destined to some paradise where we lay in idleness, as Joanna says, nor are we destined for some valley of sadness where we'll be banished forever. That's not reality. Heaven and hell is a state of mind. We create that here on earth, even for ourselves. And for those who are suffering, that inner world of torment is as real as anything else. But that's why Joanna brings us the hope of Jesus as a model and guide for us to know that it can be done. It has been done. She goes on to say, as a physician of souls, he prescribed experiencing them without becoming enslaved, pointing to loftier goals to be reached through personal effort. So we can enjoy the beauty of life, of nature, of people, without being shackled and so deeply attached to those things. Whereas, or if we didn't have those things anymore, we would be devoid of any joy or happiness. We must be very careful when we are enjoying things. Whenever we're doing something, we have to ask ourselves and pay enough attention to ourselves if we are participating in that thing to numb ourselves. Let's say, for instance, Netflix is all the rage, and so is Hulu and Prime Video and other things of that nature. So people will binge watch shows, movies, and there's nothing wrong with that. I cannot tell another person, you're wrong, you're attached to that show, you're X, Y, and Z, because I don't know. None of us know. Only that person knows within their heart and soul. But it's for us as individuals to do a self-evaluation, to ask, are we engaging in things to numb ourselves so we aren't getting in touch with ourselves, with our true purpose in life? There are some who live in this belief system that you must be completely cut yourself off of any form of enjoyment because that's against God. They don't even have, they might not even have some modern day things. And we're not putting down any religion, way of life, because everything is about your intention, what our purpose is. So it's a prescription that Joanna gives to us, that we experience life without being enslaved and remember our higher purpose and respect things and utilize them as needed and not overdoing it. And I was listening to a friend of ours, Daniel Assisi, recently, and he was telling this anecdote about his wife. And during the earlier parts of the pandemic, where people were flocking to the stores to just buy all the toilet paper and baby formula and everything you could get your hands on, and his wife went there to get formula for their baby. So she got like 2 or 3 cans, and there were still cans left on the shelf. And when she went to the cashier said, well, there's still some more left on the shelf. Why don't you grab the rest of them? And his wife, Nicole, turned to the cashier and said, well, why would I do that? Then the next person won't have any. And God forbid, that's someone else's child. That's another mother who'd have to suffer. That's what that's what we're talking about. when we're utilizing things as we should, when we're respecting the things around us and using them, as Joanna says, to generate happiness for all. If I'm selfish and only thinking of myself, I'm going to grab all the 10 cases of formula that are there, completely not thinking about the next mother or parent that has to care for a child after I leave the store. It is a sign of selfishness. And we're not passing judgment, just making an observation. This pandemic has really brought out a lot of different sides to us. Some really good, some amazing, and some, well, probably need to work on. And we say this with all sincerity and love in our hearts, because Spiritism does not teach us to judge one another. It teaches us to love one another. Who are we to pass judgment on anybody else? We don't have that authority. She goes on to say and explain, human torments proceed from a guilty conscience, originating from other bodily existences. The spirit inherits its own actions, which resurface as effects. So even though we do not often remember our past lives and the details, Joanna, in many of her other books, does say we do have something called emotional memory, where although we won't remember what exactly happened, but the emotions will bubble up to the surface, often giving us feelings, thoughts, leading to disorders that aren't from this lifetime, that are unexplained. And the only explanation that there can be is reincarnation, past lives. When the effects are healthy, they're beneficial. The opposite is equally true. We reap what we sow. If we've sown good things will come back. And the opposite is true. And again, she says this not for us to judge or to be harsh with ourselves, just for us to face certain truths so we can move on from it and begin the process of self-healing. From the deep archives of the individuality arise matrices of afflictions that surface as purifying processes, facilitating the onset of illnesses, torments, and dissatisfaction. As much as we dislike having illnesses and everything that brings us discomfort, they actually do serve a very good purpose for us to work through, and as Joanna calls it, purifying ourselves. There's a great example in one of Joanna's books, and I wish I had it in front of me because the name absolutely escapes me. I believe it's the book that has the title Health and Conscientiousness, I want to say. If not, I'll share it with you guys later on the SSB Facebook page for those who might be wondering. But basically, in one of these books, she gives this story, this true story about this young man who's in his, I believe, early 20s. And I think it's Joanna's book. Again, I'll put the name of the book on the SSB Facebook page later today. It's a story of this young man, and when he's in his early 20s, he develops severe depression out of nowhere. So, long story short, when he's sleeping, the good spirits take him to a special location where he's receiving some therapy. And they do a sort of review of what's going on with his life. And I believe it was a spirit like Bezerra de Menezes of that caliber was explaining to him that for his evolution and for his personal growth, that depression was necessary for him to endure temporarily. There's a lot more to the story, but for the sake of this conversation, we wanted to bring this. That's not to say that every time someone has cancer or similar diagnoses, that they all stem from the same reason. That is not true. What works for one person or what happens to one person can be the effects of something completely different. Someone could have post-traumatic stress disorder because of a certain trauma, physical abuse, and someone can come back from war and have post-traumatic stress. Some people are triggered by other things. That's why it's important for us to know ourselves and to not look outward for quick fixes. Now, if we're utilizing something or someone, such as a therapist or someone at our spiritist center asking for guidance, that's not looking outside. That's trying to have someone else help facilitate my internal dialogue that I need to have with myself. I digress. Illness is not bad if we take it from the point of view that it helps us to progress and to grow. It can serve as a great tool for our personal growth. She goes on to say, likewise, they create appropriate conditions for an easy or arduous life in the home, either characterized by socioeconomic and moral problems or enriched with love and resources that favor one's journey. Something for us to really think about. The situations that we're born into, from an early age, the things that we experience. And as our good friend Paula would always say, I'm ad-libbing here. When we go through difficult times or difficult situations or periods in our life, one of the best questions we can ever ask ourselves, where is the lesson? What is the lesson in all this? What can I learn from this? That is part of a large key to us finding and being less tormented. Joanna goes on to say, within the profound, immortal soul lies the root of the phenomenon that now sprout in the soil of the physical body. Layman's terms, cause and effect. And the answers as to why we're tormented, suffering, are inside each one of us. Plain and simple. Except it's not that plain and simple. It's much more complex and requires a great deal of compassion that we ought to have for ourselves and for one another. Your current torments are torments you engendered in past lives. That can be quite a hard pill to swallow. That's why we started out this talk today wanting these loving vibrations to reach those that are truly suffering. Because sometimes we get stuck in this cycle of guilt, this guilt complex. And it just goes around and around in a circle. You feel guilty, I feel bad, I did this to myself. I feel guilty, I feel bad, I did it to myself. And it's never ending. It's like a loop. It just goes and goes. Some people are stuck in this for lifetimes. In the book that I'm not entirely sure it's in English yet, called Torments of Obsession by Manuel Filomena de Miranda, by the medium Divaldo Franco, it talks about a particular case where a gentleman is just sort of self-obsessed because all these negative thoughts about himself. And it's like he creates this cocoon that's never ending, so when they go in the spirit world, they have to perform this spiritual surgery in order to cut off and stop that constant cycle he's creating. Our ability to add insult to injury is incredible. So it's not bad enough that we do something that's not great or good. Sometimes it's pretty terrible in a previous life. But then we get into this guilt complex. And if you found yourself in that cycle somehow, there's a great book by Joanna de Angelis called Existential Conflicts. It's an excellent book. There's a chapter entitled Guilt, and it'll help shed some light if you are going through that particular issue. So yes, we know the law of cause and effect. It's real. What I'm going through today is a direct effect of what I have sown. You ruthlessly afflicted others, and now you hurt without affection. You troubled others with perversity, and now you hurt without affection. Your inner being is a boiling cauldron. Conflicts follow conflicts. And you move in desperation from one to the next. It is hard for you to exteriorize and talk about them in order to feel relief. This is a biggie. And we're not here to say one way or another that such and such horrific crimes don't deserve to go unpunished. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is our own individual relationship we have with ourselves, how we are perceiving ourselves, and how difficult it is to get out of that loop. So difficult that Joanna reminds us that it's even hard to talk about. And this is applicable to many things. There are many people that endure a lot of traumas, and it gets so confusing in their psyche that it's difficult to know where to begin. They don't know how to exteriorize, put out what they're feeling to find relief. So they suffer even more. Some of you might think, well, such and such person did X, Y, and Z, they deserve to suffer. It's not really our call. Our purpose is to know ourselves, work on ourselves, our own improvement. And Joanna says, the more you work on yourself, and let me stop there. This is a key indication of whether or not you are working on yourself. Because if you are truly working on yourself, you will reach a point that you will see and find out how difficult it is to change, that you develop empathy and compassion for others because you know how hard it is to change. So then you feel for others. And this might be a really bad or poor analogy, but we work in healthcare, and I work with a population that predominantly is stricken with mental health and substance misuse disorder. And I have found that many people are lack compassion for that particular population of people that are inflicted or find themselves in that situation. But one way we were able to find understanding is that if you can imagine, for instance, something you're addicted to, sugar, processed sugars, donuts, cake, candy, cookies, whatever it may be, anything that you're addicted to that's negative to you. I know, again, this is a bad analogy, but if you try to stop, you see how difficult that is. Imagine something that's a million times more addictive and the torment that it causes, because it is tormenting. So again, that's an instance where we need to do some self-reflection to try to understand our neighbor. Now, I'm not getting into the complexities of criminals who commit heinous crimes. But just for our discussion here today, so we can be reminded to have more compassion and to be reminded, cause and effect, right? It does no good for us to pass judgment on someone that's already ill, unbalanced. It does nothing. But if we want to be proactive and we hear someone speak of someone that has done something bad or heinous or just against the laws of basic human decency, that person is ill and needs our prayers. And it is noteworthy for us to remind ourselves that that person is somebody's son or daughter or mother or father. I remember many, many years ago, and forgive me for telling a personal anecdote, but this is one that just comes to my mind, where I had this case of this young man in his 20s. He wasn't all things considered, he wasn't a horrible drug addict. There are, I guess, along the scale, the gradient of things, he wasn't the worst, but he was experimenting with a particular drug, and he happened to overdose, and it caused brain damage, and he never came back from that. Point of my story is that the first day, or the day after he came into the hospital, he came into this particular section of the hospital I was working in, and I heard a lot of chatter amongst the professionals, some compassionate and others not so compassionate. And I'm not passing judgment, it's just an observation. And some people that just made comments, but we couldn't help think that this young man was somebody's son. So much so that about 30 minutes later, this particular patient's mother, she came into his room. She was seeing him for the first time since everything had transpired. And I will never, ever, for as long as I live, forget the words that came out of that mother's heartbroken, soul-broken self. Her words of asking her son to come back to her, to wake up. They were so sincerely said with her whole heart that I felt like it reverberated through the entire unit. And everyone was silent. Even the naysayers were silent and couldn't say anything, because that one act of profound sadness from this mother who so clearly loved her son, despite his imperfections. Just something for us to think about. Because whenever we discuss this topic of cause and effect, of struggles. We so often have this inherent behavior, perhaps it's even atavistic, where we're so quick to judge others. And that's an incorrect posture, disposition to have. Joanna goes on to tell us that phobias, complexes, and repression dominate your mental landscape, and you feel like a failure. This is what happens to those that are suffering. She gives us some tidbits of hope. She says, retemper your soul, however, and leave the den of your torments for the clear light of reason. No one on this earth is destined for suffering or destructive conflicts. Retemper your soul. Recalibrate. Find stability. And know that we are not destined for some form of hell or bitterness. That is not our destiny. All return to learn, recover, and rebuild. That is why we return back. That is why we are born again and again. That is why we experience what we experience, why we endure what we endure, is to recover, rebuild, redress, to grow. And she does remind us of a universal truth that in the absence of love action, suffering renewal appears. So when we don't take the high road, inevitably, we take another road that usually incorporates suffering. But either way, we will grow, we will learn, we will evolve. It's the law of progress, part 3 of the Spirit's book, the divine natural laws. We are destined to move forward. That's just our destiny. And if we want to have a belief in destiny, believe that you are destined for happiness. You're not destined for the state of suffering that you're in. No way, no how. It's a state. It's a phase. It's a moment in the blip of our existence. Although it never seems to feel that way when we're enduring it. Yes, we know. But it's good for us to open up our minds and be reminded of that. She tells us, therefore, pursue peace and release from your distress, and you will soon experience them. Take note that she doesn't tell us what we should do to pursue peace, because for everybody it's different. And she says, release from your distress. What works for one person may not necessarily work for another. Some people find great release in yoga, in meditation. Some people have a greater affinity for charity work. Not saying that any one of those things are exclusive or need to be done or by themselves or together. Everyone needs to find what works for them. It's a self-discovery process. Maybe we need the same medicine, but the dosage is always going to be a little bit different. So maybe I need to meditate. But maybe my meditation needs to be done a certain way. Or maybe I need to do walking meditation. Or maybe I need to do what St. Augustine recommends in question 919 and take note of my day and evaluate it. Maybe for some people that doesn't work for them. They need to talk to someone. That's okay. She says, pursue peace and release from your distress. And you will soon experience them. her final thoughts in this chapter. She brings this example, and let us read and we'll discuss it. In the unforgettable encounter between Jesus and the woman of loose morals, who washed his feet with the ointment of her tears and wiped them with her hair, we find the psychotherapy for all miseries. Jesus said to his host, who mentally criticized him for condoning the attitude of the poor, wretched woman, "She has loved much. Consequently, her sins shall be forgiven." Looking at her with tenderness and affection, he, Jesus, instructed, "Go in peace. Your faith has saved you." Love that has been converted into reparation for one's wrongs is the effective remedy for all sores of the body, mind, and soul. Love that has converted into reparation for one's wrongs is the effective remedy for all sores, mind, body, and soul. Love and be at peace, leaving your pain in the past and arising from the rubble, resurface, happy for a sound reconstruction of your life. This image of this woman washing Christ's feet with her tears, with her hair, as if they were an ointment for him, is very symbolic. And if you can find yourself in this woman, if you truly have experienced some form of suffering, where you've reached that bottom, but you're ready to feel hope, and so you turn to the Master in all humility, in all humbleness, and you bring your whole self, and you bring your most precious gift. Therein lies the beginning of our healing and our profound awakening. It's very symbolic because a woman's hair in that society, in the Jewish belief system, was something quite sacred, and still is for a lot of Orthodox Jews. Something extremely sacred to a woman before the eyes of God. So for her to do this act was something so profound in her own upbringing and belief system, reflected what that seemingly small gesture was absolutely a great gesture of her soul, and one that we should reflect on. So, dear friends, I thank you so much for listening. I'm going to go over to the comment section and see if we have any comments. Aldo Pacheco, Frojera, good evening for everyone from Rio. Hey, I wish I was in Rio too. Share some of that sunshine. Right, Leo? You're from Rio.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there are several comments and some questions, I believe, too. I believe she was really writing this for you. For example, this is again on YouTube. Paula said, "Thank you, Leo, for extending the concept of immune system from the physical to the spiritual worth, contemplating how we fortify our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual selves." I believe that is mainly because of the prayer, but also I think you talked quite a bit also, Kirsten, in this capability that we have. And then Murillo said that's really scary to think we can be stuck in that mental state for many lives, right? I think that's something really interesting
Yeah.
that you mentioned. And then Murillo again made a comment on what you said: different strokes for different folks.
Absolutely, Murillo. That's right. Yasko also made a comment in our text.
What?
I'm just going to read her comment.
Go ahead.
Yasko Adakava.
Yes.
She says, in the present times of COVID-19, with home reclusion, limitation to our freedom to go anywhere with any group of people, small or large, and when drastic changes are imposed upon us, in the core of our lifestyle adopted for so long, sometimes since childhood, how to use Jesus' example or incident such as that when he and his disciples were not allowed to enter in Samaria to pass well through present challenge. I think she's trying to ask, how do we use Jesus as an example in terms of how we're dealing with COVID-19 now and how we're remaining isolated and our lives have been turned upside down. I think that's what, Yasko, you're trying to ask. I don't know if she's in the comment section anywhere in here. I think that's what she's saying. How to use Jesus' example or incidents such as that when he and his disciples were not allowed to enter. Okay, she says yes. Okay. Thank you, Yaska, for your comment and your question. So that's a profound question to ask and very important. If not, that is the question to ask. How can we use Christ as our model and guide and apply it to modern day times, especially now? Well, first and foremost, I will say, in my limited understanding, I'll be responding to this. So, Leo, please jump in if you will. I don't want to do, I would like to do Joanna and Spiritism and Jesus justice and their words and their lifestyles and all the love and light that they brought. But if we think about Jesus and that famous phrase, WWJD, what would Jesus do? That was made popular, I believe, in the 90s. It's that question we ask ourselves: if Jesus were here in my position, what would he do? Well, he would use every instance of that opportunity as a learning tool. He would use every medium to share love, goodness, hope. He would use every opportunity to show solidarity, which we are seeing a lot of that in our neighborhoods, in our cities. We see wonderful acts of kindness that reminds us of the humanity that still exists in people, the kindness, the love, the goodness that still exists in people. We have so many stories. Go on social media, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and you see all these stories being shared. Yeah, there are some not so great ones. Absolutely. That's a given. But there are some really great ones as well. So reflecting on what good can I do with what I have is the question we need to ask ourselves. Because in the Spirit's book, when they talk about charity, they said it's important for when we're ready to practice charity, that we do all the good that we can that is within our power to do, whether it's small or large gesture. It's up to each individual to ask themselves, because it's not going to be the same for everyone, because everyone has different capabilities, different abilities, different strengths and weaknesses. You know, in our group alone, as soon as the pandemic started happening and there was this huge wave in our Spiritist family that people were and are still making masks. So they're doing what they can that is within their power to do to aid during this time for those who are suffering or going through, just everyday people. That is Christ-like at its finest. And we're not saying that everyone has to go and start making masks. No, everyone's different. Everyone has their own purpose. Perhaps, your purpose might be in your own particular neighborhood. Most recently, we joke and say how much toilet paper has been out of stock. It recently has come back into stock. And now what is actually out of stock are things like flour, things like instant yeast, sugar. So clearly, Americans are baking. They're at home and wanting to bake a lot of bread, I guess. I don't know. But if you go to a lot of these stores, if you go on Amazon, if you go on your local, what do you call them? Shops, supermarkets, they're predominantly sold out. So why are we bringing this? Well, because recently we had someone in our development in our neighborhood post in our private Facebook group asking for flour and for yeast. So it was so endearing to see how many people, mainly women, who were responding saying, hey, I can give you a cup of flour, or hey, I have a couple of extra packets of instant dry yeast you can make some bread with, or, I have some extra sugar, I can give you about a cup. So people were all kind of coming together and saying, I have a cup, I have a half a cup. So it's something small, but that little act of solidarity makes all the difference because you don't feel so alone and isolated. Because that's the real issue, right? Is that sensation of being isolated, being alone. That is the worst feeling. So I'm going to move on to other comments. Yasko, I hope I answered your question. Modelo says, I don't need to be in Rio. It's 84 here in Champaign. Well, then I wish I was in Champaign. I think I miss Raquel. Beautiful lesson. Alba Morales says, I'm wondering if Joanna mentions in this chapter about tormentors, i.e., when the torments are coming from another person, incarnate, discarnate, how to handle that. So on this particular chapter, Jesus and torments, she does not specifically go into how to deal with when others are tormenting us. But we will say, knowing just a little bit about the psychology that Joanna brings from the spiritist perspective, she always invites us to reflect. So if we're dealing with a situation where we have a tormentor, cause and effect, where's that tormentor from? Who invited them? Did I invite them? And what is the lesson in all of that? For those of you who have the opportunity to, I know it's just in Portuguese. I don't think they have the subtitles in English yet. Or maybe they do. I don't know. The Divaldo's recent movie about himself, about his life. I think it's called Divaldo. They give a really good depiction of this. Several, but one specific obsessor that followed Divaldo for like 20, 30 years, for a large portion of his life, tormenting him. And here was a man in this life, he was so dedicated to others. But this spirit was relentlessly tormenting him, adding insult to injury. And what was his reaction to that? Well, obviously, eventually, with the help of learning Spiritism and, of course, his mentor, Joanna de Angelis, and other good spirits as well, and just good friends as well, learning how to live the best life that I can live. Because we cannot control what others do. I cannot control whether it's an incarnate or discarnate spirit that is, trying to obsess me. We cannot control that soul. It's just not going to happen. But what I can control is myself. In the book Between Heaven and Earth, they talk about this case of obsession. And that the only thing that they could do to help this incarnate woman who was being obsessed by a discarnate woman was to work on the incarnate woman and getting her to work on herself, to be more positive, to be more loving, to be more self-forgiving, to enlighten herself. All the texts and all the books that we read talk about that. Of course, most definitely, we should pray for that spirit. Absolutely. And if we feel like for some reason although you might not physically remember, maybe you have sort of anguish in your heart towards that spirit and you don't know why, and you can't pray for them, that's when you reach out to your fellow spiritist friends or friends who pray and just ask them to pray for you and for this experience you're having to find strength. So it definitely is an opportunity to go inward. When we are going through that experience, because it's like opening the door, we invited them in. It's very easy to invite someone in. It's much more difficult to ask them to leave. So, and we say this, and I hope this doesn't come off in a negative sense as accusatory or judgmental. Not at all. Not at all. We're imperfect. We're human. We do things. We've done things. That's not the point. The point is that we work on ourselves, forgive ourselves, and do the work to move forward.
Kirsten, if I may
Go ahead.
interject.
Sorry.
Yes. No, there is one that came from Paula. Paula says that she couldn't get through you.
Okay.
And she says, "Thank you, Kirsten, for another wise and perceptively talk. Would you please comment further on, quote unquote, human torments proceed from a guilt conscience on page 68, i.e., recognition and release of guilt, carry over of guilt from past lives?"
Yes, that would definitely entail a whole other discussion in and of itself. But that's a great question, Paula. It's a fantastic question. One that requires, I think, a tremendous amount of. I'm seeing her comment now. Okay, a good amount of discussion, and I would say I could give a blanket statement, but that blanket statement would not do justice because the reason why each one of us feels that guilt is very different. So I could say, well, Joanna says to do XYZ, but there isn't a black and white response. Instead, because if there were, and it were that easy, I think our lives, humanity, would be very different. But instead, it's always the same from Joanna. It's an invitation for self-analysis, self-evaluation as to why we are experiencing those emotions. Again, I mentioned this book, Existential Conflicts. She has a chapter entitled Guilt in that book. It's an excellent place to start. There are other books as well I could recommend. There's one actually that's actually in English by I think he's a therapist, medical doctor, Dr. Alberto Almeida. Maybe he's a psychiatrist. I kind of forget. But he's in the realm of mental health, to say the least, or in health. And there's a book that's about forgiveness. And they talk a lot about self-forgiveness. And we have found that that book is quite vital in combating or managing, resolving issues of guilt. Because if we can't grasp or begin the work of inner healing, he's a psychiatrist, thank you, Raquel, of inner healing, we can't work from the outside in. I mean, you can. You're not going to be successful. Maybe for a time, we can fool ourselves, we can trick our minds, but the real work will inevitably always have to get done, which is the work inside of ourselves.
So, real quick, Kirsten, if I may also bring another comment that Marisa actually made, gratitude as always, and this kind of connects to what I was thinking here that you mentioned very well, that which is hard, as you said also, to admit and to work from this point of view, that the antidote of our suffering is within us, and we find within us the ways to get out of it, to get out of our torments, to our the consequences of our actions, whether from previous reincarnation or from this time, right? And one of the things that it really, it's like mind blowing that when you get these examples, that she brought the examples, the example of the woman who comes to Jesus, and Jesus actually says, look, she has loved much. And I was contemplating on that comment, and I see that it's an opening up, right? A new beginning for this woman, that not necessarily she corrected the wrong directly that she made before, but she has allowed through a love in action to enter a new phase of her life, to enter this new realm where she can be open for greater things to come towards her as well, that eventually will help her, as Jesus mentioned, to get out of her torment, get out of her negative condition that she have made in the past. Because we also think that, oh, for me to go ahead and correct what I have done, that you have to go back to that person, to that moment, and fix what has done. You can fix it in many ways, right? You can open up and create this new environment in many ways. So that was one of the things that I got, and it's like an aha moment that you read these passages from the Bible, and it takes obviously higher minds like Joanna de Angelis to come to us and really like broaden our perspective. It's like, wow, I never thought that way. Even though we read it, it may come, it may stay in between the lines. It's not directly to us. We have to really dig into it and come in contact with it. So thank you for that. And I think this is a great reminder for all of us. So I don't know if we have anybody else here who would like to make another comment or question, or you can even comment on what I said. Sorry.
No, I'm just taking it all in as I'm drinking this water. I'm taking it all in from what you're saying, Leo. No, I agree with you. Joanna's a great starting point for anyone that wants to begin that work of self-healing. Her work, any work in spiritism really, but her work, of course, I'm a little bit biased, so take it with a grain of salt. But her work is phenomenal. She's always coming from a psychological, therapeutic perspective. So if anyone's looking for a starting point in understanding their own self, that she has a plethora, a sequence of books out there that are in English. So they're ready for anyone to purchase online. You could just Google or go to the SSB website, or Edise, which is now Febi Publishers website, or the United States Spirits Federation website. You might find some other books, not Joanna's per se, but just some other books in general that help towards self-enlightenment.
Kirsten, another comment. I'm trying to read here and make sure that nobody has another one, but I think it's important for us to touch on this as well. One of the elements that she also brings to us is this idea of being devoid of choice, of having no capabilities to open up our horizons. What would you comment, or what advice you can give, studying this chapter, of many of us when we find ourselves in that situation? Seek help, or what can we do? And I know you already mentioned, but I think it's prudent for us to say, because many times we think that we are in a situation that we have no way out. We forget, even us spirits, we forget that we have choice, right? We have a free will to exercise, and make sure that we're doing the right things, even though we may be doing wrong things still. We're still in this trial and error, right? But what would you say? I mean, for people who are out there that are devoid of choice?
Do you mean for people who feel like they're stuck?
They're stuck. That is correct. Yes.
So for those people who feel like they're stuck, whether it's perceived or real, because everyone, it's different situations. But for those who perceive that or feel that they are stuck, I believe the original saying, which I'm not going to even attempt to say it in Portuguese, is something like, if I were to translate it, when there's no answer, that is the answer. I think my mother, if she's still watching, I think she used to say that. When we're searching for the answer and we get no answer, that is the answer. It's profoundly philosophic, but what it means is when we find ourselves in a situation where we feel like we're devoid of choice, which is an illusion in and of itself, because we always have choice. Now, what that choice entails is a different story. So sometimes people are stuck, for instance, living in a household, whether you're growing up and you really dislike your stepfather or, a relative or what have you. And so we feel stuck. But one of the beauties of an experience like that, and I'm not going to touch on abuse because that's a whole different dynamic and situation. So we won't get into that because we don't have enough time to discuss that. And I'm not specialized in that area. However, we will say that when we are in the position and we find ourselves where we feel stuck, where we feel like we have no choice, where all of our choices, like, this is it, we could do something else, but it would lead to something that we don't want. So sometimes we're stuck in a situation purposefully because that is our call to awaken. So, for example, Nelson Mandela. I know people will say, he's Nelson Mandela. Much of people say, oh, Jesus is Jesus. I'm not at that level. Perhaps. But Nelson Mandela was not a perfect man by any means. But he took a really bad situation and made it good. He didn't have a choice in the country that he came from. He was imprisoned for all those years. And he could have just done a lot of things, been bitter about it. But he actually used that opportunity to help others that were around him in the jail. That is the ideal situation, right? That we're taking our painful situation and we're utilizing it for our own betterment, for our own personal growth. Now, I will say that is an incredibly, incredibly difficult thing to do, because the paradox in it all is that why do we feel so trapped? Why do we feel like we're stuck? Because if I'm stuck with myself, right? Ultimately, it's in part an opportunity for me to take a really good look at myself. Because if we reap what we sow, something we have done, whether intentional or unintentional, whether out of ignorance, lack of experience, or in a previous life or this one, whatever it is, until we're able to find the meaning in it all, it's very difficult to progress and to learn from that. And I'll give you a perfect example. Children who do not respect their parents, who have a hard time honoring them, will have a very hard time in life, in the relationships in their life. Why? Because the family is the cell of society. It's the core of where we learn a lot of stuff, to say the least. So it's very hard for us to find happiness if at our core we do not make peace to find it somewhere else. But this is very common behavior. We look out. That's why we see a lot of people go to some great extent to do extravagant things to sort of escape themselves. But the paradox is we can't. It's an illusion. I'm going to go skydiving. There's nothing wrong with skydiving, by the way. There's nothing wrong with skydiving at all. I'm using that as an example for someone who may be doing that to numb any connection to their inner self. Everything in our lives, if we pay attention to it enough, all of our suffering, if we get to know ourselves, if we connect, engage where we are at in life, utilizing Spiritism, a lot of its teachings, we will find ourselves on a different level. But I will say, again, it is something extremely difficult to do. It is not for the faint of heart. It is not for those who will do something one time and say, well, that's hard. I don't feel like doing it. And go do something else. Because you won't accomplish it. But that's what a lot of humanity does. That's why Joanna says, I don't think I have the slides are not connected anymore, but she says something. She says, love action. In the absence of love action, suffering renewal appears. So like that saying, it's either through love, there's a Portuguese saying, either through love or through pain. It's ultimately our choice. We always have a choice. Sometimes I think the illusion is that our external life is the only choice we have, and that dictates our happiness one way or another. And that's an illusion of life, because it doesn't. And that's a call for us to go in. As Marlon Rakedale would say, go inside yourself and do some analyzing. I know that there is a great still amount of negative stigmas when it comes to therapists. And not all therapists are great, I'm sure. But if you can find a therapist that can, or a spiritist counselor, whatever, to facilitate this inner dialogue. Maybe your therapist is running. Maybe your therapist is jogging or lifting weights or journaling, whatever it is. But the need to go in to have that internal dialogue is something that no one can do for us. We can go to the Spiritist Center 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. It's not going to do the work for us. It's just not. We still have to go home, live our real lives, and apply the knowledge. And it is hard. Blood, sweat, and tears often accompany growth at the level that we're at. And that's why solidarity is important, to realize we are not alone, that we are all in this together, that we're all in this boat.
Thank you, Kirsten. And you ended very well, that it's always important for us to remind ourselves that we have one another. We don't do these meetings in the past, obviously physically at the SSB. Hopefully we'll be there soon. We do these talks online right now, the studies, and sometimes we think it's just work, right? Because we're using our time wisely. But it's truly through these times that we are able to open up and to show our solidarity to one another, that, look, there is something better in life. There's much more than the mundane things that we are called, and not, as you said, that mundane things of life is not helpful. You mentioned running, exercising, journaling. There are many ways. And this is another way that we can connect, and it can really expand our minds and our hearts to something that will give us the insights that sometimes, just like I said, the silence may not provide us the answer, but when we're having these conversations, these dialogues, that we are able to say, that's really what I need to do. It may not happen tomorrow, but here we are. So thank you for.
I'm sorry, can I comment on one thing you
Sure,
just said?
go ahead.
You said that silence sometimes doesn't provide the answer, and sometimes the interaction with others is what helps. And that's what Joanna's talking about when she says that it's hard for some people to exteriorize what they're feeling to find relief. But if you've ever been interacting with someone and you've heard someone describe something and you're like, man, that puts exactly into perspective or into words what I'm feeling, but I couldn't otherwise have said it. Or sometimes we learn from one another. It's kind of like, you're saying stuff and I'm like, aha, that makes sense. I got it. Whereas alone, not that bright, probably wouldn't get it. That's why we need each other to help each other.
That is so true. Yeah, and we're not alone. And I think that this is one of the, if we find ourselves, again, as we were trying to remind, or with the question, and you said it very well, devoid of any help or any condition to change, you do have a phone, you do have a friend, you do have a way to reach out to somebody.
Yeah.
Allow that to happen, and hopefully you'll be able to get the answers that are necessary in our lives. So we
Absolutely.
thank you very much again for this continuation of the studies of this amazing book. It's amazing to bring Jesus into our homes in this talkative way. There are many ways that you can do. Hug a tree, get connected with nature. Murillo, since you mentioned that it's 84 there, enjoy the 84. Be under the sun, right? Do the things that and be with one another.
Yeah.
Hug the ones that you can, and maintain the distance. By saying hey, or giving the knuckles, whatever it is. But we thank you again, and we would like to now finalize with our prayer, and wishing everyone farewell. Before I do so, because after the prayer, we will just really connect with the higher minds, and then turn off from there on, and finish our session for tonight. But I would like to remind everyone that this amazing month of May, we will have two guest speakers with us. May 9th, we'll have Julio Carvalho talking about caring for the body and the soul. We will have on May 16th, Julio Padovan talking about the implications of rational faith. On May 23rd, we will have Alba Morales talking about On the Way to the Light, an amazing topic, amazing book, the teachings of Emmanuel to us. And now we'll close the month on May 30th with two other chapters of the book, Planetary Transition, chapters 9 and 10. So much more to come this month of May. 5 weeks to start with this, counting today, obviously, that we will be connecting again in this form with our SSB friends and followers, and hopefully we'll be back again full force in our physical form at the SSB headquarters. On that note, I would like to wish you farewell with our final prayer. If you again connect with your mentors, the mentors of your home, the mentors of the SSB, or whatever that may be, that you would like to do so, pray for others. As we are saying our prayers or saying the words, please connect in this highway so that we can really not only receive but share a little bit of ourselves. We all need. We understand that. That's why we are reincarnated here on Earth together. But we are also capable to share a little bit of ourselves in this moment of prayer, as well as during the moments of our physical interactions. Give of yourself. As Kirsten brought the reminder from Joanna de Angelis, she has loved much, the women who came to Jesus. So we need to do this. We need to love much and put the love in action, right? Which we know, and we have been explained through Spiritism, that is the true ideal of charity. So this way, we ask you, dear Lord, that you guide our minds and hearts to exercise the teachings that we have received tonight. Allow ourselves to understand our conditions in the now. Perhaps if we have the condition
Okay. So it looks like we have some technical difficulties. So I'm just going to finish off Leo's prayer. And we thank the good noble spirits and our guides for this evening. We thank all those that participated today with their loving vibrations, with their comments or questions, engaging in tonight's lesson from our dear Joanna de Angelis. We hope that all those that are listening and partaking in this have received this healing balm of love and of light to soothe their hearts and their souls, to have hope for the happiness that is yet to come. We thank you in Jesus' name. So be it. Thank you very much, everyone. Wish everyone a very good night, a good evening. Be blessed and be well. And as always, if you have any questions, please contact us through our website. And otherwise, have a great rest of your weekend. Bye-bye, everybody.